Hello, my name is Scott McIntyre. I haven't seen my children, my daughter, Hinata McIntyre, and my son, Harugo McIntyre, now for 702 days. They were kidnapped without reason or explanation. I've been attempting to locate them since that time. I don't know if they're alive or dead. I've had no indirect or direct contact or communication with them despite fighting for more than 700 days. And this is my story.
You can be just like me. You're double. All you have to do is ask to see your family. You have so much to see. You're double. When you learn about both cultures of your family tree. Bum. We're double.
Hi everyone. Before we go to today's episode, I would like to remind everyone that we at Find My Parent recently launched a petition targeted at the Japanese government, asking them to stand up for the 3 million kids who have been trafficked since 1991 legally with the help of single custody laws in Japan. Japan does not recognize joint custody laws, as the lawyers and judges profit from it and receive up to 30% of the child support payments until the child reaches 20 or 21 years of age. While it's a gain for the lawyers and judges, this is a loss-loss situation for both the children and parents affected by the single custody law. Winning this campaign and getting the attention of the Japanese government to make a change depends on our ability to call on thousands of supporters like you. Your signature is all the support that we need. Please support our petition by signing it today at www.change.org/joincustodyjapan or check out the show notes for the links. Now, in today's episode, we are speaking to an Australian named Scott McIntyre, who have been making waves when it comes to the issues of child abduction and parental alienation in Japan. Scott was detained for 45 days in Tokyo for trespassing when he went to his in-laws' apartment to seek information on his 2 children. Legally, he remains married, has no restraining order against him, retains full parental right, but has not been able to see his children since May 2019, when his wife first left him with his children. While researching for our petition, I watched a video of Scott on YouTube and I knew that we need to get him on the podcast to explain further about the importance of the petition and the severity of the situation in Japan. I have included a short soundbite of the clip, and you can find the link for the full clip in the show notes.
My part of this case is over, but what's not over is the situation with my children. I haven't seen my children now for almost 250 days. They were taken in May last year without my permission, without my consent. And it's my opinion that they continue to be suffering from parental alienation. There is a law against abduction and kidnapping in Japan. I want this law to be applied by the Japanese police, item 224 of the Japanese Penal Code. In addition, Japan has specific international treaties and obligations to ensure that parents and children are not removed from each other. And I want Japan and the Japanese government to uphold those legislations and those treaties that they've signed, because 100,000 children are being taken without the consent and denied access to a parent in Japan. Most of those cases are not involving foreign parents such as myself. Most of those cases are those involving Japanese parents who don't have a voice. And what we want to say is that what future is there for Japan if children are being taken and removed from their parents without their consent? The family court routinely refuses to investigate these forced removals. The police, in my case, I went to the police dozens of times and asked for their support in investigating this issue, which is covered by Japanese law and international obligations, and they did nothing to support me or my children. So all we want as parents, and I stand here as one of a representative of a huge collective of parents from France, from Germany, from Italy, from America, from Canada, from South America, from Asian nations. But most importantly, I stand here representing the Japanese mothers and fathers who've had their children removed from them. And all we want is a system of a joint custody in Japan, that Japan joins the rest of the civilized and modern world in implementing a system of joint custody, because this is an issue that has been affecting Japanese parents and foreign parents, male, women. This issue does not discriminate on gender or race. It's one that affects everybody equally. And we stand here on behalf of our children who don't have a voice. And we want the Japanese government to bring a system of joint custody so that children are no longer removed from a parent.
Hey, Scott, first of all, thank you for taking time to be on this podcast. While researching for a petition on change.org, your name kept coming up when I searched for what was happening in Japan, especially when it comes to parental alienation and abduction. I'm sorry that you had to go through all that, and I hope you'll be willing to share your story today with our audience. I find it ridiculous and just horrible that you were detained for almost 45 days in Tokyo prison for trying to visit your children at your in-laws' place. Is that actually how it went down?
Yeah, that's right. Yep. That's not the most horrible. The most horrible news is that unfortunately, me and my children are, yet another 3 victims of this system of child abduction that is that's supported, that's encouraged, and that's aided by so many aspects and elements of Japanese society. Of course, I would rather not have been arrested and detained for a couple of months. But we need to do what we need to do to try and find our abducted children, because the way that the system currently is in Japan, they don't want you finding abducted children. They don't like you looking for abducted children. Indeed, my understanding was that there was a memo that went out last year from the Japanese police to the Association of Private Investigators in Japan, telling them that they were no longer permitted to even investigate any cases of child abduction in Japan. So this is it's a horrific system. It's an inhumane system, and it's a system that very influential elements of Japanese society are doing everything that they can to protect, and Japan needs to be called out internationally. They need to be held to account internationally, and they need to be told that time is long overdue to stop child abduction.
Yeah, exactly. The amount of disregard for family values and the right of children to have both their parents in Japan is alarming. Japan is the only developed country and the only G8 country that do not have a joint custody law, and Japan routinely forces families into single custody, even if the divorced parents are willing to practice joint custody. With that said, Scott, let's dive deeper into what happened to you. Can you tell me your situation briefly so that people who are listening can get a good understanding about it?
Yeah, sure. No worries. So in May 2019, my wife abducted our 2 children, Hinata, our daughter, and Harugo, our son, from our apartment in Tokyo. I came home one day, and it's a familiar story to listeners of this podcast. I came home one day and they were not there. I attempted to contact them, and there was no contact. And since that day, in May 2009, so it's almost 2 years now, I've had no contact with my wife, no contact with my children. I don't know for sure that my children are alive. I don't know if they're in school. I don't know if they're healthy. I don't know anything. I literally don't know where they live. I have no way of contacting them. For many years, I was essentially raising the children by myself. I would take them every morning to school. I would pick them up every afternoon. I would do their homework in Japanese, which is not easy. I would take them to all their after-school activities on the weekends. I would take them to parks. My wife was absent for most of that time. She would regularly go out drinking and partying with her friends. And essentially, I was raising the children by myself. She made it clear to me that she wanted me gone for whatever reasons, her reasons. This happens. Marriages, relationships break down. This is normal. And what's not normal is the reaction in Japan, where you have a system of single custody that allows, and in my opinion, encourages, with the addition into this mixture of the Japanese legal profession and indeed lawyers who are chasing money. Lawyers in Japan can claim up 30% of any money paid as child support to the children, which is one of the only nations on earth where lawyers can legally claim a slice of money that should be going to children. And also, in my opinion, that encourages lawyers to encourage parents to abduct their children, why the system in Japan is so complicated and multi-layered. And so you can imagine the grief and the anguish that a parent is suffering when they don't know if their children are alive or dead. They don't know if their children are healthy, are being educated. None of this information. I went repeatedly to the Japanese police to attempt to file a missing persons report. I was told I couldn't do it. I attempted to file a kidnapping report. I was told I couldn't do it. I had access to my wife's email and discovered during this time that she'd been planning this abduction with a lawyer for months prior to the actual abduction. Her family was also involved in the planning and execution, as well as another lawyer of the abduction. And during those emails between my wife, her mother, various lawyers, it was made clear that their goal was to have me deported from Japan, and to be completely cut off from the children, and to never be able to return to Japan ever again. I attempted to present this evidence to the Japanese police. They told me they weren't interested in even looking at it, and to go away and to stop bothering them. They considered this a family matter. It's clear under Japanese law that a child abduction is a crime. I presented them with that law. They didn't want anything to do with it. They repeatedly told me just simply to go away. About 6 months after the abduction, there was a major typhoon in Japan where several dozen people were killed. I had no idea if my children were amongst those who were killed, because I have no idea where they are. I have no idea if my children are in Japan, if they're somewhere else on the planet, if they're alive or if they're dead. So I visited my wife's parents' house in an attempt to see if my children were there. I entered on one single occasion into the lobby of that apartment and was there for no more than 60 seconds. A couple of weeks later, there was a knock at my door with more than a dozen Japanese police with a search warrant. They came into my apartment and arrested, carried me out in front of all the neighbors down into the police car. I was held in the local police station in our neighborhood for, I don't know, maybe 3-4 weeks. Then I was transferred for another 3-4 weeks to Kosuge, the Tokyo Detention Center, where Carlos Ghosn, the Nissan executive, was also held prior to his departure from Japan a year and a half ago. And the conditions in there were brutal and inhumane. You're subjected to 24-hour light. You're essentially not permitted to exercise. You're not permitted to stand up. You're not permitted to talk during these periods when you're meeting with the prosecutor. I mean, this is a whole separate story. Japan also needs to very quickly reform their prison system, because this is also an inhumane institution, one that we're not here to discuss on this podcast, but one also that needs a serious inspection from the foreign community. So I was arrested, charged, and convicted of one sole count of trespassing, teitakushinyu in Japanese, into my parents-in-law, the common area of my parents-in-law apartment. And indeed, it was not even due to a quirk of Japanese law. It was not even the parents-in-law who were the victims in this case. It was apparently the apartment owners, this common ownership committee. They were the actual ones that took legal action against me. So it's just a very curious case, and certainly, I think, completely unjustified, given that I'm the victim of having my children abducted, and I was merely attempting to locate my children. I was harassed and vilified by these police on multiple occasions, and indeed, that continues. So subsequent to my release, I managed to obtain an Interpol yellow alert, basically searching for my children. I presented this to the same police that arrested me. They racially abused me. They told me to go back to my country, that they would never help me. And then they locked me in a room and turned the lights off for 10 to 15 minutes before allowing me to leave the police station. This is absolutely disgraceful treatment. It's illegal for the Japanese police to behave like this. I attempted to file a human rights complaint with the Japanese Ministry of Justice, with evidence of all the actions from these police, as well as the kidnapping of my children. I received notification after 3 weeks that the human rights division within the Ministry of Justice didn't even deem it necessary to look at my evidence. They didn't deem it necessary to open any form of investigation, because this is an issue that Japan wants to keep silent. They want to keep it hidden from the world because it's bringing great shame upon them. And instead of doing what most normal nations would do in investigating, addressing and correcting human rights violations, Japan blocks their ears to the international community and stands in front of the international community and lies to them, as they lie to individuals, through the police, through the court, through government instruments. And they refuse to admit they're wrong. It's an element of Japanese society, of Japanese culture, that doesn't pertain solely to this area. In my opinion, of being in Japan for many years, it's a trait of the Japanese people. If something is wrong, if something is confrontational, they will never face it. They'll never admit they're wrong, and they'll never correct the errors. And in the case of human rights violations, it's a poor cultural trait to maintain, and one that the international community must force Japan to confront and must force Japan to change, because it's clear they won't change of their own will and volition.
I always think that in order for people to support a cause, they really need to understand what is happening and then empathize to the hurt, resentment, and anger, and finally decide to act or do something about it to help. In order to facilitate people who are listening to go through all those steps in their head, tell me the worst part about all this alienation and abduction that has happened to you.
It's not just alienation. It's the fear of not knowing not knowing where your own children are on this earth, and being blocked. It's not like I've been quiet. I mean, I've made 2 separate requests so school records in Japan are not kept centrally. They're kept through the local government where your children are enrolled. And within Tokyo, that's then divided into the 23 districts of Tokyo. So it's a rather curious situation. So I've made 2 separate requests, as I'm legally entitled to, because I still maintain joint custody over my children, to obtain the school records of my children. On both occasions, those records came back completely redacted, covered in enough black ink to go through several printer cartridges. And when I asked why this was the case, they said, well, your wife asked us to hide these records. And trying to unravel all of these institutional situations is extremely difficult. It's extremely taxing physically and mentally. I've attempted on more than half a dozen occasions to file missing persons reports. I've attempted to file kidnapping reports. I should also mention, during my time in detention, my wife and her mother came into my apartment. The lease was done through her family. So they cancelled the lease on the apartment, essentially evicting me during my detention. They then removed, disposed of and stole virtually everything inside the apartment, because when she left everything. So she came back 9 months later when she knew I was in detention and cleaned out the apartment. I attempted to file charges on her and her mother, trespassing, the same as what I was convicted for, as well as theft. The same police told me they didn't see any issue with what had happened and that they weren't intending to do anything. Just another blow under the Japanese system. But for me, the daily struggle is one of I went. My daughter was 8 or 9 at the time of her abduction. My son was 7. So you go from waking up with your children and talking about the day, taking them to school, picking them up, doing the homework, having their friends over to play at the apartment, or we go to a park to play, preparing dinner, giving them a bath, reading them books, talking, laughing, telling stories. All these kind of things for 7, 8, 9 years on a daily basis. So then the very next day, having that removed and not knowing where they are, not knowing what their daily activities are. For me, it feels more like, it feels in a sense that they've died. That all you have is memory of these times. The same grief, I imagine, that a parent would have if a child had died. I'm not able to know anything about their lives, and it's been almost 2 years now. I can't. I struggle to look at photos or videos because it's too difficult. I struggle to remember the sound of their voice. I struggle to remember what they look like. There's every chance if I passed them in the street now, 2 years later, that I wouldn't recognize them. And it's this grief that you carry with you. You know, sometimes you may get, tied up in things that you're doing on a daily basis and forget about it, but then it suddenly strikes you. You know, if you pass a school or you pass, parents and children in the supermarket, it's just little things that brings it back. I've been fighting for 2 years through the family court in Tokyo to be able to obtain any form of access to my children. There were 3 reports that were compiled by the court. The investigation was done by an individual who has no formal training in parental alienation, has no university qualifications in any form of child psychology. I complained repeatedly about this and asked for an expert to be brought in. They refused to do so. The reports have progressively become worse. The first one was 6 months after, and roughly 12 and 18 months after the abduction. And to the point now where, I've submitted or attempted to submit 20 hours of video footage, hundreds of photos of me and the children together, with the children saying, just normal things, I thank you, Papa, I love you, Papa, all the things, the daily things we're doing, playing together, all these things. The court said, no, we see no need to even look at these documents. The first report, they did an extensive family tree of my wife, all her family, her parents, her brothers, her relatives. On the other side of the tree was me, nobody else. So it's as if, the children's Australian family doesn't even exist for the Japanese court. Again, I complained about this. They said, oh, no, it's no problem. We're just only interested in Japan and Japanese people, not interested in foreign people. My wife had told the court directly that she despises Australian people, Australian culture. The children were born and brought up in Australia. They're very close with their cousins, very close with their family. And of course, this is the thing that's often missed in this. It's not just me who's suffering on this side, and the kids are not just suffering from the denial of access to me But in this case, they're suffering from a denial of access to their cousins, to their grandparents, to their culture, to their history, to their language, to their background, all of these elements. When the kids were in Australia growing up, we made sure that they went to Japanese school. We made sure that they spoke Japanese at home. We made sure that they read and wrote Japanese, that they had Japanese friends, that they were constantly exposed to Japan because it's a very important part of their identity and their culture. Yet the Japanese system is saying that none of that matters, that there's no obligation for them to even maintain a connection with that part of their identity, which is for me it's a human rights violation. Because the United Nations CRC Conventions on the Rights of the Child says that you must maintain contact with both parents. You must maintain contact with any cultural, historical, linguistic background that you have, and these kids are being denied that. And this is another instance where Japan should be brought to task by the international community because they're creating a little army of Japanese children out of these mixed race, biracial children that have the right to access every element of their identity. And the Japanese system is saying, no, we don't recognize that, and we won't afford kids these rights. So for me, it's a daily struggle because I'm constantly talking with politicians here, many of whom are great, recognize these problems and are trying to change it, but not enough of them, unfortunately. I constantly talk with local government organizations. I'm meeting with lawyers. I'm in and out of courts on all sorts of cases. I'm currently suing my wife in the District Court of Tokyo over an affair that she had with a Dutch guy a couple of years ago, which she's denied in court, despite the fact that the gentleman in question very kindly provided me with a statement confirming that it did indeed take place. I'm suing her over denial of my rights. I'm attempting to sue her over the theft of my property. I'm doing everything I can to try and use whatever legal methods and means that I have, but the walls are so thick, the barriers are so high. The institutional roots of Japan's abduction industry are so deep that it's a long battle. It's not a battle that one person can win. But that's why, every time we can shine a light on what's happening within Japan, it's a really positive thing, and that's why we thank you guys at Find My Parent, everyone else that's trying to stop this problem. It's of course not a problem that's exclusive to Japan. I'm aware that this goes on in other nations as well, but Japan is now, unfortunately, the Olympic gold medal winner in child abduction, and this nation shouldn't be fit to host an international sporting event. Nations shouldn't be doing trade with Japan. There shouldn't be Japanese people freely traveling on visas to countries where children have been abducted by Japanese people, by the Japanese system. And we need to do everything we can as an international community to fight alongside the Japanese parents, because we should say of the estimated 100,000 children that are abducted every year in Japan, 95,000 of those are Japanese victims of the Japanese system themselves. So we must support local victims. We must fight as an international coalition to bring an end to this horrific system that is that's making a lot of people very rich and very wealthy. People profiting off the abduction of children. There must be some form of a royal commission into this, that everybody who's profited off the abduction of children will one day be brought to face justice, and that there'll be justice for our children, and that the human rights of our children will be restored.
One of the things that we gathered through our research for the petition is that the Japanese lawyers who do this are doing it out of greed and nothing else. Apparently, the system in Japan is set up in such a way that the lawyers will get a huge chunk of the child support payments till the child reaches 20 or 21 years old. I can blame the lawyer's greed all I want, but if you take a step back and look at what is happening, it's the whole Japanese government and the laws they have created that is enabling these lawyers to be greedy in the first place. So, Scott, in your situation, did your wife, now ex-wife, plan this from way beginning with lawyers? As I noticed that that's the case in most situations. Can you also explain a bit about your situation, how the lawyers got involved, and why she did all this in the first place?
Yeah, so she was in contact with the lawyer for months before the abduction, asking how she could find a way to get rid of me. The lawyer gave specific advice to try and make me angry, to secretly record me, and then to go and file some form of domestic violence complaint, which is standard procedure in Japan, because the domestic violence laws here are completely ridiculous, where somebody that has been accused of this, I'm not sure, but I suspect that this was the case in my situation, has no right to even know they've been accused of it. They have no right to challenge it. They have no right to defend themselves. But if someone, it doesn't need to be a woman, it can equally be done and has been done by men. If you make a domestic violence complaint, then the whole system will close upon you, and you won't be able to get any information. So I suspect this is what's happening to me. And I should say, just clearly and very much for the record, I love my children, and there was never in any way, shape or form, any form of domestic violence. However, the lawyer in the court documents is claiming that that somehow there was a violence from me, and that I should be responsible for the breakdown of the marriage, and I should pay my wife approximately $30,000 for being such a terrible guy. There's no evidence being presented. There is no justification for any of these claims whatsoever. And me and my lawyer are very confident that we will manage to see this off. But this is the element of people just chasing money. As to why my wife's doing it, I also want to know the answer to this question. And indeed, I would love if you could somehow attempt to reach out to her, because it's very important not just to take my side of the story. It's equally important to listen to the other side of the story. And I've done quite a bit of media around my case. In every instance, I've asked the same thing. Please reach out to my wife or her legal representatives. Please ask them for their side of the story. And they've refused to do so. This is more than half a dozen occasions where they've been contacted by media from Japan, from Australia, from all around the world, asking them to present their side of the story, and they won't do so. So it's curious to me that if this woman has some deep reason or justification for a 2-year-long child abduction, that she shouldn't be reluctant to tell her story, whatever her story may be, because I would also love to hear from her and hear her side of the story, hear why is she doing it? What is the justification? What is the benefit? How does she see it's in the interest of the children to remove them from their father? Not just their father, but their Australian family, their Australian culture background, remove them from a major part of their identity for 2 years and inflict, lifelong damage upon them. I would love to know also the reason why she's doing it.
Right. If anyone from Scott's ex-wife team is listening, we from Find My Parent would love to talk to you. We would like to present your side of this just so that we can understand what caused you to do all this. No judging, we just want to talk. With that said, Scott, I think the core issue here is the sole custody law in Japan. The moment that changes, I believe a lot of things will follow through from there. Even things like false domestic violence cases and all that will go away because there's no reason to do that at all.
Yeah, that's precisely correct. And that's exactly what happened in my case. And it's what happens in the overwhelming majority of cases. And it comes back to a problem of the system. Because if you have a system of joint custody after divorce, where parents have equal rights and have equal access, then then there is no kidnapping. The other problem is the domestic violence laws themselves that unlike most countries on earth, don't require judicial intervention. So under the Japanese system, somebody can simply go to the police and present themselves without evidence. And this is a crucial part, without evidence, as a victim of domestic violence, and they are immediately afforded protection. That protection is unchallengeable. That's probably not a word, but you know what I mean. And it's without time limit. So you have this bizarre situation, and I know people that have used this in reverse when they're attempting to just simply get away from somebody they don't like. And it took them less than 30 minutes at the police station with no evidence, with no documentation. And 30 minutes later, they were presented with a form that they were recognized as a victim of domestic violence. It was absurd. The person knew that there was no domestic. They were simply trying to use these laws to hide the children from somebody that they didn't want to meet. And they were very quickly granted such protection. So, of course, we recognize in Japan, as anywhere else in the world, there is a problem with domestic violence, as there is all over the world. And I stand opposed to any form of domestic violence. But you must have judicial inquiries. In Australia, within 1 week, the case must be presented to court. Both parties have a chance to state their case, defend themselves, to present evidence, and there's a determination made. The problem in Japan is you have single custody combined with these unbelievably poor domestic violence laws, and lawyers know it. And this system has been abused for years. If we say that 100,000 children are abducted in Japan every year, and more than 75% of those cases are involving domestic violence incidences, then this makes Japan the world's leading domestic violence nation by about triple the next nation. And it's just, it's patently not true. It's absolutely not true. And it's doing a disservice to genuine victims of domestic violence. So not only the custody laws need to be amended, but at the same time, the domestic violence laws need to be amended to remove the powers of police to, without time limit, offer protection to alleged victims of domestic violence. Only courts within Japan should have the powers to do this. Local government should not have the power to do this. The police, outside of temporary measures, should not have the power to do this. So you have a combination of, because if we say, okay, joint custody is introduced tomorrow, but there's no amendment to the domestic violence laws, what will happen is you'll get even more of these domestic violence cases because they're unchallengeable. So there's no need for anybody to go to court to try and get a court order because you simply know that you're protected. And what happens is it then creates so many false cases where people fall victims to these things. So this is what I'm trying to even I'm trying to discover if this was the case against me. It was definitely not the case in court, but I don't know if or not my wife went to the police. I suspect that she did, but the police refused to tell you anything. It's like Orwellian world where you can stand accused of something, but not even be aware that accusations have been made against you, let alone have the opportunity to challenge it. So these things they need to change, and these are the systems that are being, as you said, regularly abused by lawyers. The amount of budget that the Japanese government allocates towards protection of domestic violence victims is extremely high. And if you factor in payment for single mothers, payment for children in these situations, it's not dissimilar to the defense budget in Japan. So this is an institution that so many people are profiting off. Domestic violence shelters, women's NPOs, and all these are framed only as if only women can be victims of domestic violence in Japan. There's no recognition of male domestic violence. I was regularly physically and mentally assaulted by my wife during our marriage, regularly. I attempted to mention this to the police and they literally laughed at me. There is no recognition in Japanese society that domestic violence can work both ways. It's only ever the case that a woman can be a victim of this. Regularly in cafes, on the train, on the street, I regularly see Japanese couples where they're having a fight and the woman will just openly slap the man on the face in public. You can't do this. Right? You just cannot do it. But the Japanese turn a blind eye to this. So if we're going to have these laws, if they're going to be stringent, let's have it both ways. Let's have equal protection for everybody, regardless of gender, regardless of race. But let's make it a judicial investigation, that there can no longer be silent, lifelong protection, because that allows kidnapping of children, and lawyers know it, and they use the system and they abuse the system.
The question that I keep coming back to whenever I hear all this is that if all this is happening all over Japan, and we know it is happening from speaking with people like you on the ground, how come the news never report it, or the magnitude of the issue is often understated and practically swept under the rug?
I mean, anecdotally, I know just so many people, but the thing in Japan, and I agree, is that people don't want to talk about it. It brings shame, it brings embarrassment, and indeed, I've seen numbers of suicide numbers, for example, that are very high within this a sad little community of abducted parents. So Japan is recognized as having one of the highest suicide rates in the world as well. I think this is directly correlated to the number of victims of this, parents who are victims, children who grow up as victims, because children are growing up without a parent. But it's not talked about. It's not discussed in the community. You can have a case one day where a parent is there, the next they're not, and nobody is asking questions. Oh, I haven't seen your husband. And, in most other societies will be like, oh, I haven't seen your husband for a couple of weeks. Is he all right? Here, nobody talks about it. It's silent. It's swept under the carpet. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to constantly shine a light on this, because not just this, but it's other elements of Japanese society where, most of us who are involved in this, we love Japan. We've invested a lot of time and energy and commitment into Japan, and we want to see Japanese society continue to evolve and to grow, and for our children who are Japanese citizens, we don't want them to grow up in a society like this either, where difficult issues are not discussed, where there's no robust debate about whatever it is, politics or human rights violations or aspects of society where people are being oppressed. There's no discussion on any of these issues. That Japanese society is like one great variety TV program where things are just designed to numb your brain. You're not designed to challenge the status quo. You're not designed to question authority. And it's these aspects that are impacting us in this struggle, because nobody, almost a very small number of the Japanese victims of this are challenging it, are pushing, are causing, what the Japanese call meiwaku, something uncomfortable for them. And, every time I go to attempt to obtain my school records, I'm causing these people a living hell because they don't want to deal with me. And so they pass me from department to department. Oh my God, here comes the guy again. We have to deal with him. But so instead of addressing the issues and the problems and addressing and correcting them, they simply attempt to confuse you and make you go away through all sorts of bureaucratic wrangling. So in the second appeal over my children's redacted school records, was done by a lawyer, and they said, we dismiss your appeal on the grounds that one of the kanji, the Chinese character that was used, one single kanji was not correct from the lawyer. So therefore, we dismiss your appeal. And you must go through the whole process. It's just absurd. The whole system is designed for you not to challenge it, not to question it, as it is in every aspect of Japanese society. So we need to change. We need to change a lot of things, which is why the struggle is so big, why the struggle is so deep. And, I think there are people, within this who know what's happening is wrong, but they can't challenge it because you can't have someone in this system of hierarchy, 3 or 4 levels down the ladder. They can never challenge what the person 2 or 3 steps up the ladder's done because it's a Japanese society thing. So trying to break this, trying to crack this system, it's so difficult. But this is why, especially for the foreigners who have no shame or fear in talking about these things, we must continue to agitate. We must continue to push, continue to find allies within the Japanese LBP community, the non-LBP community, and crucially within the political sphere. To push our cause. So, now there's campaigning for this election in Tokyo. So people are out on the streets, with these loudspeakers talking about their policy. I go every day from suburb to suburb and just stop and talk to these people, explain the situation and ask for their support. So, I hope that we can have more Japanese allies in doing this because we need to change the system. And as with any change in society, you look what happened with civil rights in America. You look what happened with apartheid in South Africa. It came from the grassroots. It came from a collective struggle, and we need more people involved in the struggle to help us change things. Because the story is not known. It's not known internationally, and the Japanese government puts a lot of effort into marketing their own image. There was a special supplementary budget that was passed last year of, I believe, $20 million that they spent on international marketing to promote their reaction to dealing with the COVID situation, because they want the world to think good of them. That's what Japanese society is built upon. And you combine that with the lack of a free and independent press. Japan is regularly ranked somewhere, in the midst of tin pot African dictatorships in terms of global press freedom. There is no press freedom here. The press are not free to report, are not free to talk on issues that will disturb the wa or interfere with Japanese society. There's very little discussion of not just this, of any issue that can be of any damage to Japan. Japan presents itself as a democracy. Oh, really? You've had the same ruling party in power, bar a one minor 2-year blimp, since the end of World War II. Show me another democracy that's had no transfer of power. Never. It just doesn't exist. Because this party runs the thing as a dictatorship. There's no dissenting voices allowed. There's no scrutiny allowed. And every time this issue is raised internationally, they do everything they can to quell it. I'll tell you a story. Last year, we had a major feature on this child abduction issue published in the Sydney Morning Herald, Japan's leading newspaper, right? It was published in the weekend edition, like a 5-page front of the magazine supplement kind of thing. It was all online, a major thing. And the journalist is one of Australia's main investigative journalists. He worked for months on this story, talking with so many parents, talking with government officials. He really knew everything, and he presented it very well. The day after it was published, he received a call from the Japanese embassy in Australia. They said, we would like to invite you for lunch. He called me, said, this is a very unusual. What do you think? And I said, go and see what they have to say. He called me after the meeting and he said, in 20 years of this job as a journalist, he's never been so humiliated or embarrassed. The Japanese embassy sent 3 senior staffers to this lunch, which went on for a couple of hours. And he said they berated him for 2 hours nonstop. What is your agenda? Why are you damaging Japan's reputation? Who is paying you to do this? What is your problem with Japan? You had a foreign government interfering with a free press in Australia. How is this possible? How on earth is this possible? Because the Japanese government is terrified of anything that can damage their image or their reputation. And they spend inordinate amounts of money and time to polish, to protect, and to uphold that reputation, to the point where you are harassing journalists who are shining a spotlight on human rights abuses in Japan, and you're attempting to silence them. They followed that up with a letter to the editor of the newspaper demanding explanations into why they were damaging Japan's reputation. The newspaper told them to go and stuff themselves. But this is the length that Japan will go to. These are the lengths the Japanese government will go to silence people who want to talk about this issue. And this is why people have a positive image, because nothing negative is coming out. So this is why we need more mainstream reporting. And there was a thing a couple of years ago in the Washington Post, and we were told by Japanese politicians that this caused huge, ramifications. They're petrified of any form of coverage. So we need mainstream media to be involved in this, to keep shining a light on this, to keep pushing it, because until we do, if we keep fighting in the shadows, we're only fighting in the shadows. But we need the government intervention. We need large scale media intervention. We need Japan to be constantly on the back foot in dealing with this, where it becomes just too strong for them. And they don't want to move because too many people are domestically making money off this child abduction business. But they'll be forced to move when the international pressure becomes too strong on them, and their domestic allies, they have to say, listen, sorry, it's causing us too much trouble. We're going to have to change.
Yep. In fact, we are also finding it hard to get Japanese people to come forward and be brave enough to share their stories. If anyone listening, or any other Japanese parents who are going through this, please ask them to reach out. We would love to share their story as well and make a ruckus, as Scott said. The change must come from inside. Do the right thing and reach out. With that said, I also gathered from my research for a petition that a lot of kids who end up growing up in a broken family, mainly due to sole custody system in Japan, they end up getting involved with drugs, delinquency, crime, and in some cases even prostitution. Any thoughts on that?
I don't know, because I don't know so many victims of these children who are now adults. I certainly hope that my children don't end up in prostitution and drugs, but I don't know. The one thing about Japan that we have to say is, okay, it's not a third world nation, So poverty here is a relative term to poverty in a lot of the world, which through my work travels, I've seen firsthand what genuine poverty looks like. That's not the face of Japanese poverty. But having said that, when you slip through the cracks, it's difficult to maintain yourself. But I can't speak on that because I don't know enough. Kids who've grown up into this into adulthood. Like I said to you earlier, I suspect the bigger issue is suicide, because you're growing up with grief, with confusion, with loss, with anger, and these are very hard to find a way out of.
Yep, Japan is one of those countries with high suicide rate, and the highest suicide rate, I believe, when it comes to youth suicide rates. There must be a direct correlation to these high suicide rates with alienation and abduction. With that said, how did your family and friends take it when you talked to them about your story and what happened to you?
Yeah, mine is definitely the super supportive case, because this is an equal loss for them. So my mother had a very serious incident, and she's been in hospital for 7 weeks. And for a long period of that time, it was touch and go whether she would live or not. Thankfully, she's a little bit coming into the clear now. So during that time, I went again to the police. So the only contact I have with my wife in any way is I know her workplace, and I called her workplace, attempting to explain the situation, and police asking for her to call me. Of course, there is no call. There is nothing coming. So I went to the police. I attempted to explain the situation to them, and they simply said, "We don't care. It's none of our concern. It's none of our bother." I said, "Would you please just call my wife and ask her to explain this to the children?" And the police said, "No, we won't do that." My lawyer contacted her lawyer asking the same, and he said, "No, we won't do that." It's just horrific to understand how a mother cannot want her own children to understand that their own family is on the verge of death. And, my mother's wish was just to hear the voice, to see the face of her grandchildren. And the Japanese legal profession, the Japanese police, the Japanese court, who I also asked for help, said they can't help. And the mother herself, don't even. It's horrific. It's horrific, and it's a human rights violation. And in any civil nation, you just simply can't do it. You cannot act in this way. And so you can imagine the grief. And my parents are old, right? So I don't know how much time they have left on this earth. And so they know that they must also fight, support me in my struggle. During my detention, my trial, they flew over to Japan to support me. Because they, in theory, I have the time to wait until my kids are adults and hope they might come back and all this kind of stuff. But the grandparents, they don't have this time. But I just look at it through the lens of the kids, like what's happening? What damage is happening to these kids to have one half of their family cut off, like a leg or an arm? My children were taken from their school in Japan, removed from their school. They built relationships with friends. My son was shy and he struggled to make friends, and he had one very good friend finally, after the 6 months of school. And I would really encourage, these two. Every day they would come to our house, we would play together, we would cook together, we would go to the park and catch insects. And to see my son grow and blossom with this friendship of this one guy, really, it was such a positive thing for me. The day of the abduction, that's gone. The struggle that he went through to make, friends, gone, cut, removed. Their history has been cut, removed, amputated. Their family, their culture, their language, amputated. And it's horrific. It's absolutely horrific for children to have to go through this. And then to have no institution in Japan stand up and defend the rights of these children. It's taken me 2 years to attempt to even see my children. I asked for a photograph of my children. And the court said, "If we give you a photograph of your children, will you put it on social media?" Well, I said, "Of course I will put it on social media." Because my children are abducted. And until their abduction stops, I will search for them. And having a current photo would help in that search. And the court said, "Oh, in that case, then we will not give you a photo because you can't put a photo on social media." I said, "Okay, please, I would like to send a present to my children for their birthday." They permitted it one time. I said, "I would like evidence that the present was delivered, was opened, because it cannot be sent directly for whatever reason." And they said, No, we don't need to show you any evidence, any proof, nothing." My wife then went to the court and complained, said, "Please tell this foreigner to stop trying to contact his children. Please tell this foreigner. We don't need anything from him. We don't need presents. We don't need calls. We don't need photos. We don't need contacts. Please tell this foreigner to go back to his country and never contact me or these children for the rest of their lives. And the court has done nothing to intervene, nothing. The police have done nothing to intervene. The local government organizations have done nothing to intervene because they don't want embarrassment. They don't want to be challenged. They don't want to be questioned. They want to maintain the status quo as they want in all elements of Japanese society. You know, people who suffer through these workplace conditions where suicide is also a very real issue in Japanese society. You're made to work from early in the morning until late at night. I have many friends in this, you know, and they're on the verge of suicide because they can't handle these conditions, and you can't challenge it. You can't question it. Japan wants you to float along in silence, keeping your grief private. We're saying no. We're here to change things. And we're fighting for children. I'm not fighting for my children. I'm fighting for all children, past victims, but most importantly, future victims that we want to prevent from ever having to go through what my children and me and my family went through. So yeah, back to your question, it's an immense grief. My daughter Hinata and her cousin in Australia were very close. They would speak every week. The cousin in Australia started to take Japanese classes to be able to attempt to communicate, although my daughter speaks very good English, but to be able to, or she did, I don't know now, to be able to communicate in Japanese. She was planning to come and study in Japan to be close to her. And she calls me every week in tears. How can I talk with Hinata? How can I contact her? And what can you say to a little girl in Australia who's struggling to understand why her cousin has been abducted? You know, it's just horrific.
I definitely feel your pain, Scott. I do. It is a horrible situation, and we hope to solve it with everything that we are doing at FMP. Now, you keep saying the pressure must come from external sources like other governments and countries. What do you reckon these countries, organizations, and governments do?
It's simple. Japan must suffer the same fate that South Africa suffered under the apartheid regime. The nations of the world should immediately cease diplomatic relations with Japan. They should cease trade with Japan. They should no longer issue visas to Japanese to do business, to travel, to visit. The lands on which children have been stolen from or a connection to has been disconnected. There is, in my opinion, no more serious human rights violation of children anywhere in the world today than the ongoing abduction of children within and to Japan. Unfortunately, Japan is not an easy or a trendy target. We've seen, the Uyghur cause in China. We've seen other issues in North Korea. We've seen issues in Central Asia, in the Middle East. Nations that are not economically important or diplomatically important. But Japan, as one of the world's top economic nations, doesn't like being embarrassed. They don't want the world to know what is happening because they don't want shame brought upon them. So instead of addressing the issue and changing it, they hide it. They block it. They quell you, they quieten you, and they confuse you to make you go away individually. So we need our governments. We have more than almost 100 Australian victims that we know of, and we've been creating, let's say, major headache for the Australian government over this. To some degree of credit, there's been only, after we've pushed extremely hard, there's been some connection. I think the embassy in Tokyo has met with the Japanese Ministry of Justice on a couple of occasions and, expressed their disagreements and so on. But nothing is being done to change the system by force. We've tried, the Australian government says, okay, we need silent diplomacy. We've tried silent diplomacy for a decade on this issue. Other governments, the French, the Germans, the Italians, the Canadians, have tried silent diplomacy. Japan has done nothing to change, and indeed, the situation is getting worse. So we need, now the time has come. We've given Japan many chances, many opportunities to stop this and change it. And daily, they continue to abduct our children. So the time has come for sanctions on Japan. We need trade sanctions. We need diplomatic sanctions. The world must combine and say, stop abducting children. You're bringing grief for generations on your own people. You're bringing shame on your political and judicial institutions. Yet it continues because there's no pressure on Japan, nothing. And they know that they can wield diplomatic and economic power. So we need, and this is why the Japanese know, the foreign parents must fight, because we must convince our governments individually. The American parents must convince Biden. We must convince Morrison in Australia. The Canadians must convince Trudeau. The Germans must convince Merkel. We must convince our own government to stand up and challenge Japan, to put the interests of children ahead of economic, trade, or security concerns, because there is no greater interest in the world than the rights of children. And we must fight to bring sanctions upon Japan, because the day that sanctions arrive is the day that kidnapping ends in Japan.
How about the parents in other countries? Can they do anything to help the situation?
Everybody has different capacities. Everybody has different capabilities. Everybody's dealing with different degrees of grief, which makes it hard to do anything, I know. But the one thing people can do is that they can fight for change, because we're all dealing with our individual cases, and we all want, I want to be reunited with my kids, of course, but I want the system to stop, and I want other kids to be saved, and crucially, I want future kids to be stopped and parents to be stopped from being victims of this. So we need to bring about change. To the foreign parents, every foreign parent has a local member of parliament wherever they live, wherever their parents live, because they're also victims. Go and meet, or I don't know, this environment, not meet, but call your local politicians, explain the situation, your situation, but explain the bigger picture situation. Ask what they can do. Contact human rights organizations within your own country. And to people in Japan, the same thing. If every day, the Human Rights Division of the Japanese Ministry of Justice is being inundated with victims of child abduction, soon they will start to understand. But people don't talk. People don't take action. Visit local. I don't even have the right to vote here because I'm not Japanese, but I'm out there hounding politicians daily on this issue, presenting this issue, showing what it is, asking for support. And it's growing, but we can't do it with just 10 or 15 or 20 parents. We need a critical mass. If we have 100,000 parents contacting 100,000 politicians every year, then action is going to come, because politicians are here to serve the interests of the people. The people who are abusing and using this system are never going and fighting for political support, because the system is already there to support them. So we have the ability to change the problems, to fix things, especially the foreigners. Band together, find other people. You guys are doing such a great job in building a community as well, internationally, globally. There's other NGOs that are doing it in Europe, in America, all around the place. Find people, reach out to people, because there's not a country on earth that's not touched by this thing. I know people from all around the world who have been victims of this Japanese system. So people are not alone. Reach out, create networks. We have of the Australian parents, we have WhatsApp group, with all the parents in it together. What can we do? Discussing ideas, bouncing things around, political advocacy. So band together, particularly band together with people from your own nations. Join forces, but let your voices be heard. Talk consistently with politicians. Talk consistently with human rights organizations in your country, and ask for change, push for change, because for us to even get the Australian government to the first base took so much effort, and we're not stepping down, we're not being quiet, we're just pushing more and more and more. So yeah, the more that international parents particularly can do it, the more local Japanese parents can do it. We need just to increase the number till we get to a point of critical mass where, if Japan won't change by themselves, then we'll force sanctions upon them where they're forced to change, because this is how societies have changed throughout history, throughout the world, and Japan will change. It's just a question of how they'll do it and when they will.
Do you have any message or any call to action to other left behind parents like yourself?
That I don't know, because that's an individual thing. People deal with things in different ways, and I'm not an expert in. I'm a victim of this, not an expert of it. So my case is different to every other case. But I guess there's universal messages of of a love for a parent and a child, and that one day, one day these bonds, no matter how fractured or how afraid they are now, will be woven back together, because these parents who are fighting to be with their children, I have to believe most of them are good people, good people that have gone through grief, and good people, if they continue to be good people, set a good example for their children, because one day, you don't know when the day is going to come, the children are going to reach out, and they don't want to see a disheveled mess living under a bridge. They want to see someone who they can be proud of. And this is what I want to be for my kids as well, someone who has their life in order, who's doing what they can to be reunited with them, but who's a good person, because this is, I imagine, most of the victims of this who fight in are good people, and just maintain strength, maintain belief, because you never know the day. When you're a kid and you're waiting, I don't know, for Christmas or something, it's some point in the dark and distant future, but something good is coming. So we also have to maintain this belief that we know something good is coming, but we don't know when. It might be next week, it might be next month, it might be next year, it might be 10 years down the track. But one day that email will come, the call will come, the visit will come when you don't expect it, and you need to be ready, and you need to be a good person, a positive person, and someone that that your kids can be proud to call, their mother or their father.
Truth be told, a lot of parents that I speak to always ask the same question: why me? They are often just in disbelief that this is what happened, and it is a complete opposite of what they aspired to be. They never thought they will be going through so many court battles and hardships just to be with their own kids that they love and care for. Do you think in a similar way too?
Yeah, but it's good in a way that it's happening to people like us that are talking, so we all got to bring our skills or our motivation to the struggle. So this is what I keep saying, is what I'm going to say in court tomorrow. You people pick the wrong person to do this to, because with me this is going to end. I'm going to be the last one, the last generation that this happened to, because I'm going to make it a commitment to my children, to other children, that we are where this ends. We are where it stops. And so you can do what you want to me. You can push me down and victimize me. But there are others beside me, and I hope not, but behind me, because we're stopping it. We're ending these crimes. We're ending these violations. We're ending this abuse of children. It's going to stop with us, who don't accept it, who won't bow down and be silenced by it. We're the ones, we're the generation that are going to stop it. I've made this point before, that I often feel that the system in Japan that created to divide parents and children, views children as some form of property or a form of a possession. And the way that I'm viewing this is, in Japan, when you divorce your wife, you don't just divorce, or your husband, you don't just divorce your wife or your husband, you divorce your children. It's a completely bizarre way of thinking. I don't choose to divorce my children. I was never married to my children. So why are you telling me, upon divorce, where there is a cut of the tie between husband and wife, there should also be a cut of the tie between child and parent? No. You never married your children, man. If you didn't marry your children, you can't be divorced from your children. You are a parent. And from the day your children are born until the day one party passes from this earth, there is this continual bond between child and parent, parent and child. And this is a bond that no society should ever sever, should ever cut. And the day your children are born is, this is the biggest commitment you make in your life. You commit to raise, to support, to nurture, to love, to educate, to guide, to influence, to direct, to share good times, to share struggles, to be there for your children. This is a lifelong commitment, and it's a commitment that can never be fractured or separated, as Japan wants to fracture and separate it. So you have an obligation to defend the rights of your children. Of course, I'm fighting for my rights. I want to see my children, of course. But more than this, I want them to see me because this is their right. I want them to see their family in Australia, their culture, their history. But as the same with Japanese parents, because you're cut from one side of the Japanese family in a Japanese and Japanese case. And what did the other parents do to deserve this? What did the other, uncles, aunties, cousins, or what did they do to deserve this? So you have to fight not just through the lens of yourself, but you have to look at this through the eyes of children who are growing up. I think, Japanese school loves to do these, milestone kind of things. So every day on Mother's Day or the Father's Day, the children at the school, they sit there and they write cards and letters thanking their mother for their support, thanking for their father for their support. What do our children do on these days? What do the other children in this class who are victims of this do? What, they write a letter to their grandfather or their grandmother in lieu of their father or their mother? The other thing that we need to stop is the support of the family of these abducting parents, because this is just as a horrific situation. How can grandparents who know what their son or their daughter is doing is wrong support these actions? These people also must stand up and speak up and stop it. No, it's important for these kids to be with their mother, their father. But instead, in Japanese society, everything is silent. And you have grandparents supporting abducting mothers, supporting abducting fathers in raising their children and doing these things. They become de facto parents in a way. It's also horrific. So to the parents who are victims, to normal people who want to support this cause, we need to think what children are experiencing, what grief, what they're being told to be silent. They're being told to forget, to move on. No, these are little children who grow up innocent with dreams and hope, and they love both parents. They want to be with both parents. They want to see both parents. They want to grow together with both parents. As much harm and damage that my wife has caused me, I don't want her removed from the life of these children. I want these children to have a relationship with their mother. as much as I despise her, because she's the mother of them. And they deserve to have a relationship with her. They deserve to have a relationship with the Japanese family, as much damage as I've been done by the family. And equally, they deserve to have a right to have a relationship with me and their Australian family. It's a right of the kids. The kids don't want to know about a squabble with the parents. They don't want to know mother did this, father did this, blah, 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 blah. It's normal throughout the world that parents fight, disagree, separate. It's normal. But what's not normal is that they say, well, we can't co-parent. We can't think of the kids first. Even I don't want to see you. You don't want to see me, never again. Okay, but let's communicate. Yeah, today in school they were doing this. Next month this event's coming up. You should go. It's a normal situation because we're thinking of the kids, and the kids, they don't want to know about it. I don't want to know what my parents are fighting about. You don't want to know what your parents are fighting about. I have no interest in it. I don't care if they don't talk for me. I don't care about it. I hope that they're happy, sure. But I don't need to know the inner workings of their relationship. But as a child, as a son, I want a relationship with my father. I want a relationship with my mother, whether they're together or not. It's completely normal. And this is until we start coming up with, robotic babies that are born in a lab somewhere, this is the way it's going to be. that if you're born from two separate elements, in whatever structure of a family you can imagine or create, you have element A and element B that went together in creating you. and most of element A and element B want to be involved in the upbringing, and most kids want to be involved with element A and element B. It's just completely normal. So we just need to stop this barbarism in Japan. And we've asked politely as individuals, we've asked politely collectively, and Japan is doing nothing to change it. So we need to accelerate the pressure on Japan. Japan's hosting a major sporting event this year, and I guarantee 95% of the athletes in this global sporting event don't even know the horrific crimes that are happening, right around this stadium and vibrating all the way, north and south throughout this country.
All right, Scott, my last question to you. What is your message to your kids if they're listening to this podcast?
I just want to say that I love them. I want to see them. I want to talk with them. I want to make up for the lost years. That I never stopped fighting for them, to see them, to be with them. And, I'm always here waiting for them to come to me and looking to protect them and save them from this nightmare, that they and me are going through, a nightmare that they may not realize the full depth that they're going through now, but they will one day. And, by me talking out, all these things are on record for them to listen. If I'm not here for whatever reason, my voice will echo. And, one day they'll know the struggle.
Scott, I'm going to use the picture of you that I found online where you were wearing a shirt that says Stop Parental Child Abduction as a cover for this podcast episode. I love the t-shirt and I think it's awesome. And I hope it's okay if you use that picture.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely right. So I'm going to attempt again to wear this shirt into my court hearing tomorrow. So I was told by the judge to no longer bring pictures of my children into any court hearing. And I was told to no longer wear shirts complaining about Japan because every time I got to court, I wear these shirts, right? So I've got a proper one this time from one of the groups that basically it's a Japanese flag in black and it says Japan is a black hole for child abduction. So I'm going to attempt to wear this into court tomorrow and just to see the reaction again of this judge. Every time he says, no, you can't do that. You can't. So they don't want to be confronted with nothing, They don't want to be confronted with their crimes. So almost certainly he's going to tell me to take it off, in which case I'll sit semi-naked in the court hearing tomorrow.
All right, Scott. Thank you for being part of this podcast. And I hope people who are listening got a good understanding of why is it important for us to get involved and do something about it. With that said, if you're interested in supporting us to bring the attention to the situation in Japan and the people who are suffering from alienation and abduction there, please support our petition at www.change.org/joincustodyjapan. Now, I would like to remind everyone that our goal here is to share knowledge with you guys and show that you're not alone in this. With that said, if you need specific legal advice, please get your own independent advice from a qualified legal practitioner. If you're a minor or if you happen to have difficulties in understanding certain parts within this episode, please approach a responsible adult or someone knowledgeable and ask them for clarifications. We have done our best to make sure that it doesn't offend anyone, and if you have further questions or comments regarding Find My Parent or this interview or Scott, you can mail me at sk@findmyparent.org. If you're someone who got separated from your own parent and would like to find your parent again, please go to findmyparent.org and fill out your details. With the help of our smart algorithms and matching technology, we hope to help you find your alienated parent again. If you're part of an NGO or even a private company passionate about this topic, please reach out through the contact us page at findmyparent.org and we hope to work together with you. Alright folks, that's it for today. Speak to you soon. Take care till then.